You can't have children." He spoke the words softly, yet they were loud enough to change the color of the room. It wasn't the volume. It was the icy composure in his voice that froze my very breath midair. Outside, the ocean waves beat a steady rhythm against the shore. Inside, only the clock ticked. Tick, tock, like a countdown to the end of a waiting marriage. On the table, the tea kettle whistled, steam rising and blurring the glass pane before disappearing. Much like the way we lived, together yet in a fog. I didn't ask him to repeat it. I simply looked into his eyes, searching for any lingering trace of hesitation. There was none. Only the brutal serenity of a man who believed he was speaking the necessary truth. Behind him, the computer screen remained open. The words "transfer completed" glowed, and in the baby fund account I had saved for 4 years, there was only $0 ends. "She needs it more," he said. His tone was even, as if discussing a charitable donation. "Lila is pregnant. I have to help." I managed a laugh, one that I couldn't even hear myself. "With our money?" He didn't answer. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, as if waiting for me to understand. The teacup slipped and shattered. The heat scalded my wrist, burning, but I didn't pull away. I only thought, it wasn't the betrayal that hurt me. It was his casual composure afterward. The light from the window framed my face, one half illuminated, the other half plunged into shadow. And between those two halves, I knew I had just stepped out of the shell named obedient wife. From that moment on, I began to learn how to breathe again, with truth, with silence, and with my own 2 hands. If you've ever had to smile through a life that has run out of warmth, please stay. Because this is the story of a woman who chose freedom over a prearranged comfort. Subscribe so you don't miss these stories about women, family, and the journey to finding yourself again. The morning unfolded as if someone had followed a meticulously written script. Light streamed through the kitchen window, so gentle that I could clearly hear the hiss of steam escaping from the blue-green teapot. That steam curled around my hand, thin as a curtain, then vanished into the air. I used to think that steam was love, something you couldn't grasp, only inhale deeply to feel that you were still alive within it. Our seaside house was always suspiciously clean. Every chair was in its exact place, every curtain drawn to the precise height. Even the sound of the waves outside seemed to know its bounds, never crossing the threshold of stability that Michael loved so much. He said order was the sign of peace. I believed that. At least, I used to. He sat at the dining table, folding his napkin into sharp right angles, as if it were his private morning meditation. I always watched the way his hands moved, slow, steady, never deviating. Next to him, everything was measured: time, distance, and even the things he said. Every morning he would ask, "Did you sleep well?" He wouldn't look up. His voice was flat, even, like someone reading a memo. I would answer, "Yes, fine, thank you." And that was it. The brief conversation ended there, without any need for eye contact or a smile. I poured the tea. The sound of the water hitting the bottom of the cup was small and round, like a held breath. My fingers touched the warm pot, a slight burning sensation, but I was used to it. That feeling was the only thing that still made me know I was truly here, in this kitchen, in this marriage. On the shelf, the dishes gleamed. Michael never forgot to clear them. Even when I told him to leave it, he would stand up, carefully placing each item in its proper spot. He might forget my birthday, but he never missed a spoon. I don't recall the last time we laughed together. Maybe it was on a winter evening when the lights flickered and I joked that the house was so quiet you could hear the wind breathe. He just nodded and said, "Good. It means we're doing fine." Fine. The word echoed in my mind for years, like an unending clock tick. Outside, the sea was calm, and the smell of salt drifted into the kitchen. I looked through the window. Seagulls circled once, then vanished. Sometimes I wondered if I disappeared one day, whether anyone in this house would even notice. I usually started my morning by making tea for both of us, even though he only ever took one sip. I did it like someone tending a lamp, not for anyone, but only out of fear that it might go out. "The tea is cold," he would say, whenever I hadn't yet finished pouring. I'd smile. "I like it lukewarm." He wouldn't reply. The air in the house always held a very distinct scent, not exactly wood or sea, but the scent of repetition. Some days I'd hear my own breathing and think, married life isn't always a battlefield. Sometimes it's just a room so quiet that people forget to say one true thing to each other. As the afternoon light changed colors, Michael would sit at his desk, eyes glued to the screen, while I wiped down the counter I had already cleaned that morning. I had forgotten if I was cleaning up dust or if I was trying to fill the space between us. Sometimes I tried to start a conversation. "Do you ever think, if we left here someday, what you'd miss the most?" He looked up for a moment. "Probably the sound of the sea." "What about me?" I asked, forcing a smile. "You," he paused, then looked back down. "You'll take your teapot with you, I imagine." I gave a faint laugh. Maybe. That night, the kitchen was bright again. I sat alone, listening to the clock beat steadily on the wall. Each tick pressed home the idea that everything in this house worked perfectly, except for my heart. When the water boiled, I poured tea again, this time not for him. I just wanted to watch the steam rise, watch it dissolve into the darkness, just like every word I'd ever wanted to say had dissolved long ago. Offshore, the sound of the waves barely touched the shore. I wondered if peace truly existed, or if it was just what people called the silence when they were too tired to argue anymore. I placed the blue-green teapot on the table, my finger still slightly burned. The blurry steam covered half my face in the mirror next to the stove, and I thought, maybe love is just like that steam. Beautiful only when viewed from a distance. The light in the house was warm, as it was every day. The kind of light that makes you believe you are safe, soft, steady, unchanging. On the table, the small clock kept its predictable rhythm, each tick a monotonous lullaby. I always believed stability was happiness, that as long as things didn't fall apart, we must be living correctly. I woke up early every morning, opened the curtains, and let the sea breeze drift into the living room. Michael liked the cool air. I loved the scent of salt on my skin. This routine made the house seem alive, though it was really just our way of keeping quiet the things that were slowly cooling down. He left for work on time, returned on time, and said the same things, every day. Traffic was fine. Lunch was okay. Need anything from the store? I would shake my head, no thank you. And that was it. In my mind, conversations had been reduced to a checklist. Dinner? Dishes washed? Tablecloth straight? Those questions, simple as they were, still gave me the feeling of being seen. Until I realized he wasn't really seen. He was just remembering to ask. I often comforted myself. At least we weren't fighting, weren't betraying each other, weren't walking out. But I didn't know that too much peace could also lull a heart to sleep. The silence between two people was no longer serenity. It was just a room starved of air. That evening, a light rain was falling. I turned off the main bathroom light, leaving only the amber glow from the vanity mirror. On the counter, the pregnancy test stick was white again. It was no different from all the times before. Just one line, clear and cold. I stared at it long enough to see my own breath fog the glass surface. I wrapped the test stick in tissue paper and tucked it into a drawer, right beneath the neatly folded hand towels. The cold, golden light fell across my hand.
For just a moment, I felt like I was putting away an old secret that no one needed to know, not even my husband.
Michael was in the living room, watching the financial news. The sound from the television echoed back like the voice of a stranger. I stood outside the doorway, watching him in the dim light. He looked safe, quiet, and utterly distant. When I brought dinner out, he maintained his exact position, sitting straight, right hand holding the knife, left hand adjusting his napkin. Every one of his movements was so precise that I felt redundant. I sat down, the smell of chicken blending with the steam from the soup. We ate in silence, only the sound of the knife hitting the plate, steady like the clock. I counted every slice, as if I could measure the distance between us by that count. After a long moment he spoke, still without looking up. Dan and his wife had their baby. I put my spoon down. The sound was tiny, but in that space it echoed like something breaking. Yes, I said, trying to keep my voice normal. I saw it on Facebook. He only gave a slight nod, then continued cutting his chicken. No added congratulations, no glance, no emotion. I looked at his hand, steady, precise, and thought, perhaps those very hands had learned to portion everything, including love. He left me just enough to survive, no surplus, no deficit. The meal ended in silence. I collected the dishes, listening to the steady flow of water in the sink. Every drop hitting the metal sounded like an answer I had never received. I opened the drawer, glancing at the thing I had hidden, the white paper wrapping the test. A chill ran down my spine. I thought about the children who would never exist, about the small dreams I had folded away with my own hands. When I turned back, Michael was standing up. He said quietly, almost a breath, "Don't stay up too late." "Are you working?" "Yeah, reports." He turned off the kitchen light, leaving only a small corner lamp. I watched his shadow move down the hall, straight back, no glance behind. I sat down on the chair, listening to the clock tick. In the fading light, the familiar warmth of the house suddenly felt alien. What I had once thought was happiness turned out to be just a repetition, long enough to convince my heart it was settled. I poured myself another cup of tea. The steam rose, curled in the air, then vanished. I held out my hand, trying to keep it, but only found emptiness. Outside, the night sea breathed steadily. I whispered to myself, "Tomorrow will be the same." Then I wondered, was that a promise or a curse? That evening was unremarkable, just another meal in a long chain of identical evenings. The light from the overhead fixture fell onto the table, casting Michael's shadow long against the wall right behind me. The sound of the knife hitting the plate was steady, the thin metal slicing through the air, cold as a winter breath. I tried to eat, though I had lost all appetite. Each piece of chicken felt like a dry fragment of time, difficult to swallow. I thought I should say something, not to start a conversation, but just to fill the emptiness between us. Finally, I placed my fork down, hearing the small sound on the wooden tabletop. "Where do you think we went wrong?" The question came out softer than I expected, but in that atmosphere, it echoed like a heavy drop. Michael paused. His hand remained on the knife, the light reflecting off his sinewy wrist. "Wrong?" he repeated, his voice flat and slow. "Perhaps you were never ready to be a mother." His tone was low, gentle, yet painful. The kind of pain that comes not from regret, but from a conviction of being right. I smiled, a brief, soundless expression. "Ready?" I placed both hands in my lap and looked straight at him. "No, you never wanted to be a father." In that instant, his eye twitched slightly. The knife slipped from his hand, hitting the plate with a sharp, metallic sound. I knew I had touched what he didn't want to talk about, the darkness that lay beneath all his calm statements. He looked up.
That's not fair. I'm only telling the truth. Emma, he cut me off, his voice low. We tried. It just didn't happen. It's not that it didn't happen, Michael, I said slowly. It's that you didn't want it to happen. He was silent. Only the tired tick of the clock on the wall pressed on. I saw the light tremble slightly on the stem of the water glass, like my own heart had just collided with something hard. I leaned my hands on the table. Do you ever wonder, if we had a child,
Would things be different? He shook his head. It's not about that. What is it about, then? About peace, Emma. About having a life that makes sense. I gave a soft laugh. I think you already have that. He didn't reply. His eyes moved across the tabletop, then stopped on me. A short, cold look, as if he were checking for flaws. I realized that in this house, I was no longer a partner. I was the variable. A draft blew through the crack in the door. The candle on the table flickered slightly, the light dancing on the wall. Suddenly, everything was clear. Two people eating at the same table, speaking the same language, yet living in two separate worlds. Michael put his knife down and wiped his hands with a napkin. You always think things have a deeper meaning. Sometimes it's just what it is. And that's why you were never truly in love with anyone. He looked at me. Don't do this. I'm not doing anything, I said. I'm just finally seeing that I've been sitting alone. The space was still as water. Outside, the waves gently lapped the shore, regular as someone's heartbeat trying to stay calm. I stood up and took the plates to the sink. He remained seated, back straight, his gaze following me. I could feel the tension in the air, the thing that neither of us spoke but both heard. Water ran from the faucet, hitting the plates, creating a small, steady sound. As I listened, I felt something begin to break. Not loudly, not shattering, but cracking slowly, silently yet surely. Michael walked up behind me. I don't want us to fight. Good. We have nothing left to fight about. Don't be like this. I turned, meeting his gaze. I am like this, Michael. You just didn't want to see. He sighed. Tomorrow will feel better. You always say that, I whispered, but our tomorrow passed a long time ago. He didn't answer, only the sound of his footsteps moving away. The office door closed, the sound heavy and final. I stood alone in the kitchen, my hands still wet, the light spilling onto the floor in patches. I looked down at the teapot, the steam long gone, the surface of the water still. In that reflection I saw my face, blurred, distant, unfamiliar. I heard the sound of something beginning to break. Not a cup, not a glass, but the thing that existed between two people who once called themselves us. I turned off the light, leaving only the soft glow from the window. Outside, the sea darkened and I knew our serenity had begun to crack. Very faintly, but it would never heal the same way again. That afternoon, the sunlight slanted through the window, a pale, clear yellow, so bright you could see dust motes floating in the air. I was tidying the kitchen when I heard the door open, followed by the light, quick, confident sound of heels on the floor. Lila had come to visit, as if this house belonged to her too. She walked in with a radiant smile, kicking her shoes into the corner of the kitchen, her hair slightly tousled by the wind, a bright leather handbag still clutched in her hand. She laughed, her voice high and clear like glass chimes. Hi, sister-in-law. I was on my way home and just stopped by. Your house always smells so good. She opened the refrigerator, took a bottle of water, took a long sip, then turned back, still holding that smile. I wiped my hands on a towel and nodded slightly. When did you get back? This afternoon. Had a meeting in the city, and then I just missed Michael, so I dropped by. Michael was in the living room. When he heard her voice, he walked in, a faint smile appearing. His eyes brightened when he saw Lila. Get whatever you want to eat, he said, his voice unusually soft and warm. Any sandwich left, Emma? I nodded. Yes. What would you like, Lila? Anything, really. I'm not picky, sis. She smiled, her eyes glancing at her brother, and the light in her eyes seemed to brighten the room a bit more. I turned back to the counter, holding the teapot, steam rising and blurring, concealing half my face in the reflection from the cabinet door. The warmth felt strange, no longer comforting. I realized the steam now carried a faint, cold metallic scent. Still enjoying sis-in-law's tea? Lila asked, half teasingly. Yeah, she makes it perfectly, he replied, his eyes still on her. I set the kettle down. You could make it yourself, Michael. Michael shrugged. It wouldn't be the same. They both laughed. I heard the sounds spread into the walls, into the cracks of the doors, then disappear into the living room, as if it weren't meant for me. Lila sat down on a chair, pulling her hair to one side. You look tired. The comment was soft, yet it pricked me like a needle. I looked at her. Just some sleep deprivation. You should go to a spa, or at least take a few days off. Michael, why don't you take her somewhere? Michael smiled, not looking at me. She doesn't like to travel. Maybe she just hasn't tried, Lila replied, her voice light as the wind. I turned away and poured the tea. Would you like some? Yes, please, but not too strong. I don't like bitterness. I placed the teacup in front of her, steam circling it. She took a deep breath and smiled. The scent is so lovely. This teapot is beautiful, blue like the sea. Yes, I said. The blue-green one. Michael bought it for me. He bought it for you? She asked, a playful look in her eyes. Yes. Lucky you. She took a delicate sip, the smile still there. I watched her. Every gesture was natural, effortless, as if this place had been familiar to her for a long time. Her light perfume mixed with the scent of the sea breeze, permeating a space that had only ever smelled of tea and wood. I realized, since she walked in, the house suddenly had sound, light, and something that no longer belonged to me. Michael sat down beside her, asking about her work, her new project, her old friends. She talked a lot, her hands gesturing lightly in the air, her voice cheerful. Occasionally he laughed, a genuine, loud, and warm sound. I couldn't remember the last time I had heard him laugh like that. I stood by the sink, holding my teacup longer than necessary. The heat was transferring through the ceramic, a light sting on my skin. I didn't let go, just looked out the window, where the surface of the sea was changing color with the afternoon light. Every wave crashed against the shore, rhythmically, like a reminder. What is familiar is sometimes what we should fear. I remember when we were kids, Lila said. Mom always said you were the most serious person in the family. Because someone had to be, Michael replied, his voice laced with self-deprecation. And I was the most carefree. Still are, he said, then chuckled. I heard their voices, close, intimate, like two people sharing a memory I wasn't part of. I was only left with the gentle hiss of the teapot and a cold emptiness on my shoulder. When Lila stood up, she looked around the kitchen. You keep the house so neat. Everything is in its place. Michael likes it that way, I replied. She smiled. Yes, I know. He hates clutter. I nodded, but an idea resonated in my mind. Clutter is sometimes the only sign of life. Lila slung her bag over her shoulder. I have to go. Early start tomorrow. Michael walked her to the door. Can I drive you out? No need. I can call a car. They stood at the doorway longer than necessary. I didn't look. I only heard a soft laugh, the closing door, and then silence. When I turned back to the kitchen, the afternoon light had faded, leaving only the steam lingering in the pot. I looked into that hazy smoke and saw myself, faint, pale, half in and half out, unsure where exactly I existed in this house. I sat down on the chair, my hand still retaining the warmth. The tea's flavor had changed, becoming more bitter. I took a soft breath, feeling like I was standing before a cracking mirror, unsure if the fracture was caused by the light or by my own heart. Outside, the sea was still, but inside me, a shadow had stayed. In the morning, the kitchen still carried the familiar scent of tea, but I realized the flavor had changed. It was fainter, as if the blue-green teapot was also tired of pretending to radiate warmth every day. Light streamed through the window, reflecting off the wooden counter, where a faded tea stain remained. I sat there, my hand touching the cup, listening to the clock tick like an old sad song. Michael walked in, adjusting his collar, not looking at me. He poured his coffee, his habit so precise I knew exactly where he would stop. No words needed, no questions asked. We were still playing our roles, so smoothly it was frightening. "Are you tired?" he asked, his voice even. I looked at him, offering a slight smile. Tired of trying to seem normal. He looked up. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You know," I said softly. "No one can pretend everything is fine forever." He exhaled, setting his cup down. "She was just joking, Emma." I looked at him unblinking. "Who?" "Lila. She didn't mean anything when she said you looked tired." I placed the teacup down sharply, the liquid sloshing out, a small but piercing sound. "You think I care about what she said?" He was silent, looking down at the tea stain spreading on the table, still as if counting every drop. I stood up, reached for a cloth, then stopped halfway. "Actually, I'm not tired because of her," I said slowly. "I'm tired of having to pretend nothing is happening." No one saw the water boiling inside me. Only I heard it. Those tiny crackling sounds like pins pricking my chest. Michael didn't reply. He grabbed his coat, opened the door, and spoke softly. "I'll be home late." "Of course." The door closed, the sound soft yet heavy. In the following days, Lila visited more often. Her reasons were always different, sometimes bringing cake, sometimes claiming she was just passing by. Each time she brought flowers, laughter, and the kind of brightness this house had lacked. I didn't stop her. I only stood back and watched, like a spectator to a play someone else had written. She placed a bouquet of sunflowers on the table, her voice cheerful. "Look, sis, the house is so much brighter, isn't it?" I nodded. "Yes, it is." Her laughter mixed with the sound of the sea outside the window, blending so much that I couldn't distinguish the waves from her voice. Michael came home earlier than usual on the days she visited. He didn't comment, just walked in with an air of calm, as if everything were perfectly normal. I heard them talking in the living room, his voice warm, gentle, sometimes punctuated with laughter, a sound I had long forgotten. I sat in the kitchen, polishing the teapot, watching the steam rise like a premonition. Every time Lila laughed, the water in the kettle seemed to boil harder, as if my own emotions were seeking an escape. But no one saw, no one heard. Only the ticking clock and the strong smell of tea. One afternoon I walked past the hallway and saw them in the living room. She was holding a stack of papers. He stood close, pointing at a few lines of text. She bent her head and smiled, her hair brushing his shoulder. I stood still, not stepping in, only hearing my heart collide with an empty space. Afterward, I heard Michael quietly push money towards her. "Help me take care of a small matter." Lila laughed, her voice soft as silk. "I know. You don't need to thank me." I didn't know what the small matter was. I only knew that from that day on she visited even more frequently. Sometimes she came into the kitchen to make tea, using my kettle as if it belonged to her too. "Do you mind?" she'd ask, sweetly. "No," I said. "Minding won't help." In the evenings while they talked in the living room, I'd hear my name, low, distant, then extinguished. I didn't try to catch the words, only to recognize their tone. Intimate, natural. Like two people who shared a language while I was the outsider. One night, after she had left, I noticed the teapot was slightly askew, and a small watermark remained on the counter. I touched it, finding it ice cold. I wiped it dry, then poured myself another cup. This time, I let the water boil over the rim, thick with steam. I wanted to look at that steam. I wanted to see it dissolve, quickly, decisively. Michael walked by, stopping at the doorway. "You made too much." "I know." "You won't drink all that." "It's not for drinking." He looked at me, his eyes puzzled. I didn't explain. I just set the teapot down, listening to the solid sound it made hitting the counter. Heavy, certain, like a warning. "Are you angry?" I answered, so softly he had to lean in to hear. "No. I've just finally seen that the water has boiled." He said nothing more. We stood in silence, the steam between us so dense it was almost palpable. Outside, the sea continued to murmur, and I knew, in this quiet house, things were shifting. Perhaps they had been for a long time, but only now was I seeing clearly. I turned off the stove. The steam vanished quickly, leaving behind the smell of burnt tea. A small stain on the wooden table, like the trace of something that was once warm and then cooled forever. That afternoon, the rain was thin as a breath. The light in the house was pale, reflecting off the cold white walls. I walked into the living room, hearing hushed voices near the dining table. Michael and Lila were standing close, leaning over a stack of papers. I paused at the doorway. Their hands met. It was just a fleeting touch, but in that silence I heard everything. The language without words, the intimacy without reason. Lila looked up and smiled softly. "I'm just borrowing it for a little while, don't worry, Michael." Michael nodded. "It's fine, just use it." His smile was gentle, a rare expression. I used to think he only smiled that way for me, but perhaps that was a memory I had invented myself. I walked closer, my voice so normal that it surprised even me. "Are you always this generous when helping your sister?" They both turned. Lila kept her smile, her chin slightly raised. "You're home?" "I just needed Michael for a tiny thing." Michael cut in, his voice even, utterly devoid of defense. "She needs it, you don't need anything." The remark landed, light as rain yet cold as steel. I looked at him, long enough that I didn't need to search for words. "You're right. I don't need anything from you anymore." Then I stepped back, slowly, as if each of my footsteps might cause the floorboards to crack. In the kitchen, I heard them whispering behind me. A soft laugh interspersed, and then silence. I placed my hand on the teapot, the steam scalding my skin. I held still, not pulling away. Perhaps pain needed heat to exist. Outside the window, the rain tapped lightly on the glass, each drop falling like a lost heartbeat. I stood looking at the gray distant sea, recalling the time when this house was my refuge from fear. Now it felt like a cage, bright, clean, but suffocating. When I turned back, they were gone from the living room. I heard Michael's low voice somewhere in the hallway. "Don't worry, I'll take care of it." His voice was gentle, as if Lila was the one who needed protection, and I was merely the third party in a story where I had no place. I walked past, trying to keep my breathing normal. Lila sat on the door threshold, her feet bare, her hair slightly damp, smiling when she saw me. "Do you mind if I stay for dinner?" "No," I replied. "This house certainly doesn't lack space now." She laughed. "I like this side of your humor." "So does your brother." The comment made her pause briefly. Then, as if she hadn't heard, she stood up and headed toward the kitchen. "I'll help you prepare." I let her slice carrots, wash vegetables, and talk endlessly. Michael sat at the table looking at his phone. No one asked if I needed help. I listened to the knife hitting the cutting board, steadily. That sound used to be the rhythm of life. Now it was just a warning beat. I cut the meat, she cut the vegetables, and he looked down at the screen, occasionally smiling.
When dinner was served, the kitchen smelled of an alien mix. Lila's perfume blended with ginger and honey, sweet and confused. I no longer recognized the scent of my own home. Lila told stories about her work, her voice animated. I was just invited to redesign the interior of a gallery downtown. I might ask Michael to consult on a few things. Sure, he said, without looking up from his water glass. I have the time. I looked at them both. Their eyes met, briefly, but enough for me to know they understood each other more than was necessary. I put my fork down. You really are talented, I said softly. Now you have your own private consultant. Oh, don't say that, Lila smiled, her gaze still fixed on Michael. He murmured, She's just ambitious. Nothing wrong with that. No, I replied. It's just interesting to see you engaged again. No one answered. The clock ticked loudly into the silence. I took a sip of cold tea. The bitterness burned my throat. After the meal, Michael went out onto the porch to take a phone call.
Lila stood washing the dishes. I went up beside her, speaking softly enough for only the two of us to hear. Do you know, your brother loves stability so much. He would trade emotion just to maintain it. She looked up, her voice light. Then don't make him choose. I smiled. He already has chosen, Lila. He just hasn't said it yet. She stared at me, her eyes flickering slightly. For a moment, I saw not confidence in them, but a hint of fear. But then she regained her composure, wiping her hands. I don't want you to misunderstand. I don't misunderstand, Lila. I only see. She stopped, her hands still. Outside, the sound of the sea and the rain merged, like the noise of something beginning to fracture. When she left, Michael returned and asked, What did you say to her? I just checked in. Don't make her uncomfortable. What about me? He looked at me silent. I laughed. Forget it. I cleared the plates, carrying the teapot to the counter. The steam still lingered, thick and hazy, circling my face like smoke. I looked into it, seeing my reflection split. One half still sitting in this house, the other half having left a long time ago. In the mirror, my smile was strange. A slight curve that wasn't kind. It was sharp, acute, reflecting the yellow light. I realized, when a smile becomes a knife, it doesn't kill anyone. It merely severs the illusions I once called us. The next morning, the sunlight still streamed through the window as always. Clear, still, and soft enough to trick one into believing that nothing had changed. I walked down to the kitchen, turned on the water kettle, and reached for the blue-green teapot that usually sat in the corner of the table. But the table was bare. I opened the upper cabinet, then the lower drawer. Nothing. The kitchen suddenly felt strangely vast, as if someone had just taken away a small item that anchored the rhythm of the entire house. I stood staring at the empty spot, feeling like I had just been jolted awake from a long dream. Michael? I called out, my voice hoarse. Have you seen the teapot? He walked out of the living room, his shirt still unbuttoned. I gave it to Lila. She likes antiques. I was paralyzed. The sentence fell into the space like a small stone dropping into a deep well. No echo, just vanishing. I looked at him, searching for a sign of a joke, but his face was ruthlessly calm. What did you say? She liked it. You barely used that pot anyway. I gave a faint laugh. Not using it doesn't mean I don't value it. He put on his coat, his voice flat. It's just a teapot, Emma. No, I said. It was the only warm thing left in this house. He paused for a second, but didn't look at me. Don't make it dramatic. You're right, I replied softly. Everything is just an object, isn't it? The door closed behind him. The sound of the wind from the sea rushed in, cold and damp. I turned back to the table, looking at the light reflecting on the wood where the kettle used to sit. There was nothing left but a faint circular mark, like the faded scorch of a memory. I sat down and opened my laptop. Something urged me, an intuition. The screen lit up, reflecting my blurred face. I accessed the savings account, the one we jokingly called the baby fund. Balance, $0, 0 zeros. I blinked, thinking I had misread. I reloaded the page. Still the same. Every regular monthly transfer over the past 3 years, gone. I scrolled through the transaction history. Each line appeared like a sharp cut. Transfer to LH Consulting. Transfer to LH Private Account. LH Lila Hale. I sat motionless. My ears rang, hearing the distant waves crash against the shore. In my head, all sounds merged. Her laughter, his low voice, the boiling water in the kettle, all rushing backward into a bitter, salty chaos. Michael walked in, taking off his tie. "Have you had breakfast?" I didn't reply. "Emma?" I turned the screen toward him. "Did you withdraw all the money?" He glanced over, his voice still even. "I just temporarily transferred it. She needs capital to float her project." "The baby fund money? We weren't using it." I laughed. "Not using it? Do you know what that money was?" "It was savings," he said. "And I'm helping my sister. Is there a problem?" I looked straight at him. "Yes. The problem is you didn't ask. I didn't think you would object." "Didn't think or didn't care?" He was silent. A long pause followed, punctuated only by the ticking clock. I looked closely at him. The man I once believed would shield me from the world. Now he was the one pulling me out of every shelter. I stood up and said softly, "You took the teapot, now it's the money. Is there anything else you want to give her?" He frowned. "Are you jealous?" "No," I replied. "I'm just waking up." He gave a dry, short laugh. "You always overthink things." "And you always stop right on time," I said. "Stopping before others can realize you've crossed the line." He shrugged as if this conversation were merely a morning nuisance. "I have to go." I watched him, the light from the door falling on his shoulder. His back was straight, his shirt immaculate, showing no trace of guilt. The door closed. The sound echoed into the kitchen, hitting the walls, then dissolving like steam. I sat down and reopened the account. The empty numbers stared back at me like cold eyes. Baby Fund. The name that once held hope was now just a meaningless fragment of text. I thought of the teapot, the thing he called just an object. Perhaps to him everything was replaceable. Things, money, people. He gave things away easily, as if what was once warm in his hands was nothing but a burden. I stood up, looking out at the sea. The morning light was bright on the water, but I felt nothing but a thick layer of cold. For the first time, I clearly saw that what I had called stability was actually just a coat of paint over rot. Everything in this house was still in its place, still clean, still bright. But beneath that veneer of calm, everything was decaying. I placed my hand on the table, where the teapot used to be. The wood was cool. I whispered, almost to myself, "Maybe it's time to stop pretending." Outside, the wind carried the scent of salt. I closed my eyes, letting the cold air touch my skin. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid anymore, just empty. A kind of emptiness that makes one want to start anew, even if it means losing everything. As the afternoon descended, the sky was the color of lead. The sea wind carried the scent of salt into every crack, cold and sharp. I was stacking the dishes when I heard the door open. Michael walked in, his jacket draped over his arm, looking tired, yet composed. I said nothing, neither did he. The air between us was thick, like a layer of dust that no one cared to wipe away. He sat down at the table, pouring himself a glass of water. I stood still, watching his familiar movements, careful, restrained, as if every gesture was measured not to touch me. Finally, he spoke, his voice low. "Are you still angry about this morning?" I replied softly, "No. Anger is just a waste of energy." He looked up, his gaze flat. "She needs it more. You can't have children." The sentence fell in the middle of the room, cold and naked, and time stopped. I don't remember how I breathed after that. I only remember the sound of the glass in his hand hitting the table, the long ringing of the crystal. A stark reminder that this was not a dream. I looked at him, with no anger, no tears. I just felt a part of myself detach, drifting away somewhere. "Then you just bought yourself a reason to lose your wife." He frowned. "Don't be like that. I'm just speaking the truth. The truth doesn't always need to be spoken. So you prefer lies then?" He shook his head, sighing as if I were the unreasonable one. "You always make things bigger. Lila is just pitiful." I gave a soft laugh. "Pitiful?" "Yeah, she made mistakes. Everyone does. And you're the one fixing her mistakes, with our money." He was silent. The golden light from the window fell on his face, split between light and dark. I realized the man in front of me was no longer the Michael I thought I knew. Something in him had changed, or rather, he had always been this way, and I was just too blind to see. He stood up, putting his glass down. "You don't understand." "Try me." He looked at me, unblinking. "Lila is pregnant." That sound sliced through the room like a blade. I was frozen. There was no clock ticking, no sound of waves, only my heart beating so slowly I could hear every pulse. It took me a few seconds to speak, my voice hoarse and low. "With our money?" He didn't answer. I walked closer, each step heavy. "You use that money to take care of her? To raise a child you call your own?" He turned his face away. "Emma, don't." I cut him off. "Don't say my name right now." I gripped the edge of the table, my fingertips numb and stinging. Everything in my head felt like it was burning, not from jealousy, but from the sheer humiliation of his so-called justifiable reason. He still stood there, hands in his pockets, his voice consistently low. "You think I'm happy? I'm just trying to do the right thing." "Right for whom?" "For the family." "Family?" I burst out laughing, a dry, harsh sound. "You call betrayal and theft family?" He looked at me, his eyes laced with pity. "You're hurt, so you're exaggerating." "No," I said, "you're too calm, because you don't feel anything anymore." I stepped back, touching the kitchen shelf where the teapot used to sit, empty, like myself now. "Do you know," I said slowly, "every morning when I poured the tea, I thought I still had something to believe in. Now even the steam has vanished." Michael didn't reply. He looked out the window, his voice low, frighteningly steady. "I will take responsibility." "For her?"
"For everything."
"What about me?" He was silent. I saw it clearly. His silence was no longer restraint, it was finality. I walked past him, heading towards the stairs. Behind me, he spoke softly.
"I don't want us to turn this into a war."
I stopped, turning my head. "It's already a war, Michael. You just fired the first shot." I walked up the stairs, the wood creaking softly under my feet. Inside, everything was mixed: anger, sorrow, and a strange, profound emptiness. At the top of the stair, I turned back to look at the kitchen. The last light of day cast a golden hue over the tabletop, where the teapot had once been, where the heart of this house used to beat. Now there was only a faded stain, cold and mute. I thought of Lila, and of his words. She needs it more. Maybe he was right. She needed everything he had. As for me, I only needed a reason to leave. And he had just given it to me. That evening, the wind blew fiercely from the sea, dragging a soft hiss through the door cracks. I turned off all the lights, leaving only a small candle on the dining table. Its flame trembled, swaying with every gust. The smell of wax mixed with cold tea, pungent and bitter. Michael came home late. The door opened, the lock turning in the keyhole. He walked in, hanging his coat on the rack, every movement slow and deliberate, as if nothing had happened, as if the morning was just a minor chapter in a book he had no intention of rereading. I looked at him from the far end of the table. "Do you believe her?" He looked up, his eyes weary. "I don't want to talk about this right now." "Don't want to or don't dare to?" He dropped his keys onto the table and sighed. "Emma, everything doesn't have to be a fight." "No, you're right," I replied softly. "It only takes one person to lie and the other to stay silent. That's enough." He turned around, facing me. His expression wasn't angry, just tired. "At least she knows how to keep trust." I stood up, the cold from the wooden floor running up my spine. "Trust?" I laughed, the sound catching in my throat. "You call a lie trust?" He shrugged. "She didn't speak ill of you. She didn't blame anyone. You can hate her, but don't deny that she knows how to believe in others." I approached him slowly, wanting to see his face clearly under the candlelight. The light hit him, dividing him into a half-light, half-shadow. "And you," I said, "have lost your own integrity." A silence descended like a heavy blanket over the room. The wind outside howled softly, brushing against the window frame, making the candle flame tilt wildly. Our two shadows merged on the wall, long, blurred, and impossible to tell who was who. Michael clenched his hands, but his voice remained low. "You always say things that make everything worse." "No," I said quietly. "I'm just shining a light so you can see the hole you're standing in." He stepped back, his voice so small it was barely a breath. "I don't need a lecture." "Fine," I said. "You just need a mirror." I turned away, listening to the sea crash against the rocks outside. For the first time, I understood that silence was not soft. It had edges, corners, and when it fell between two people, it was sharp as ice. He moved behind me. "Emma," he called, his voice low. I didn't turn back. "I'm tired. Don't talk like I'm the enemy." "No," I replied. "An enemy would at least make one feel pain from fighting back. But you..." I took a deep breath. "You make me feel empty." He placed a hand on my shoulder, a familiar gesture, once a source of support, now just unnecessary weight. I brushed his hand away. The room was silent enough to hear our breathing. Outside, the wind swept through the garden, dry leaves rustling. I looked through the window, seeing the faint silver moonlight spread over the yard. The world outside was still moving, only this house was slowly dying in silence. "What would you say if she lied to you?" I asked. He was silent. "Would you believe her?" "I don't know." "What about me?" He turned to look at me. "You were the person I trusted the most." "The past is beautiful," I replied softly, "but it doesn't pay the current debt." He raised his hand, intending to touch me, but I took a step back. "Don't." "Emma." "It wasn't the slap that hurt me, Michael. It was your silence afterward." I spoke slowly, clearly, every word distinct. He looked at me, saying nothing, but I saw a faint flicker in his eyes. Maybe he was recalling the first night we argued, when I cried and he just stood there, silent as a statue. He once said silence was a way to avoid pain, but I realized that silence was just a way for the damage to be prolonged without a knife. A strong gust of wind rushed through the door crack, extinguishing the candle. The room plunged into darkness. I heard the sound of the water glass tilting, falling onto the wooden floor, shattering with a soft but sharp noise. Michael picked up the pieces, saying softly, "We can't go on like this." I turned away, my voice level. "I know, but you forgot. You were the one who started it." I picked up the curtain that had fallen, hanging it back on the hook. My fingers touched the cold fabric, damp with mist and wind. "I'll sleep in the living room," I said. He nodded. "If that's what you want." "No," I replied. "It's all that's left to want." I left the room, ascending the stairs in the dark. Behind me the door closed, smooth and cold. I stopped at the top step, looking down at the dark house. The wind from the sea still crept through the window frame, blowing cold into the heart of the house, carrying the smell of salt and the sound of waves. The only sound left to prove that at least something was still alive. I drove all afternoon, the road along the coast long and quiet. The clouds were low, the light sliding past the rows of trees, like streaks of memory being stretched thin. By the time I arrived, it was already dark. Linda and Robert's old house appeared at the end of the eucalyptus-lined road. The beige walls were faded, the dark wood door polished by the years, and the front garden was still neat, the kind of neatness only found in people who once believed order could keep life peaceful. I paused for a moment before knocking. The light spilling from the house was soft, warm like a memory I no longer believed in. When Linda opened the door, she faltered slightly, then offered a strained smile. "Emma, you haven't been here in a long time." "I'm sorry, Mom, I need to talk." She stepped aside, letting me in. The air was heavy with the scent of black tea and beeswax. The room was the same. Michael's wedding photo on the wall, the pendulum clock by the window, and the floral curtains I used to hate because they always kept the light out. Robert sat in his armchair, a book open in his hands. He looked up and gave me a slight nod of greeting. "Are you well, Emma?" "I'm fine," I said, knowing it was a lie. Linda poured tea and placed it in front of me. "Michael said you were tired. I was worried." I smiled softly. "You don't need to worry. We're just talking less." She sat down opposite me, gently grasping her mug. "My son is just under pressure. Work and then family matters." I looked at her, unsure where to begin. "Pressure doesn't turn a person into a betrayer, Mom." Linda frowned. "What are you talking about?" "He's helping Lila, with his and my money. Did you know?" She set her cup down, the gentle clink of ceramic on the saucer. "Lila is in trouble. Michael is just helping her out a bit." I gave a faint laugh. "Your a bit is several years of our savings." She sighed, a hint of annoyance in her eyes. "Emma, you have to understand. We're family. It's normal to help each other." "Do you think silence is love?" I asked, my voice low. She looked up. "What do you mean?" "That you've been silent for too long. Both you and Robert. Just letting him do everything his way, then calling it responsibility." Robert put his book on the table, his voice low but clear. "My dear, sometimes people just choose the path of least pain." I turned to him. "But the path of least pain isn't always the right one, Dad." Linda interjected, her voice softening. "I just want peace." I fell silent, looking at the steaming cup of tea between us. The vapor rose, then dissolved, like my mother-in-law's words, soft, warm, but blurring all boundaries between right and wrong. "Peace," I repeated, "is sometimes the easiest way for everything to rot without anyone taking the blame." Linda bowed her head, her hands clasped. "Michael didn't mean to hurt you. He just doesn't know when to stop." "Not knowing when to stop is a choice, Mom. Just as silence is a choice." Robert looked at me, his eyes sad. "If you need it, I can talk to him." "No need," I replied. "I didn't come here to find someone to take my side." I just wanted to understand why everyone in this house is so afraid of shattering the peace. Linda murmured, "Because when you've lived your whole life in the wind, you do everything you can to keep the doors closed." "But the wind still gets in," I said, "just through the cracks." The room was silent. The pendulum clock chimed its heavy beats. Robert stood up, walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. "It's going to rain," he said softly. I watched him. The sky outside was an ash-gray color, distant lightning flickering on the horizon. Linda took my hand, her voice trembling. "Don't leave. All men make mistakes sometimes." I gently pulled my hand away. A mistake is one thing. Hiding it and calling it love, that's what frightens me. I stood up. "Thank you for listening to me. But I think it's time someone in this house told the truth." Robert turned back, his look pleading for me to stay, but he said nothing. Perhaps he knew any advice now was just the sound of wind in a storm. I stepped onto the porch. The rain began to fall. The first drop landed on my hand, cold and heavy. Inside, Linda still sat motionless, her eyes wide, and Robert stood frozen by the window, his back bent in the dim light. I walked down the steps, the gravel crunching under my feet. The wind lashed at my coat, the cold piercing my skin, but I didn't shield myself, didn't flinch. The sky exploded with a distant rumble, the light flashing over the sea. I suddenly realized, what broke me wasn't the betrayal, but the silence that was nurtured by the two words, "Just be peaceful." I opened the car door, taking a deep breath. The rearview mirror reflected the lights of the house behind me, still warm, still bright, still the peace they chose to keep. As for me, I chose the wind. The next morning, Linda called me. Her voice was shaky, yet she tried to maintain composure. "Emma, please come over. Michael is here too. I want everyone to talk things through clearly." I was silent for a few seconds. On the other end, I heard the wind whistling through the receiver, the sound of a spoon hitting a porcelain cup, the familiar sounds of the old house. Finally, I said, "All right, Mom, I'll come." When I walked in, Robert was sitting by the window, the dim light falling on his gray hair. He nodded in greeting, then turned back to look at the sea. Linda stood next to the table, forcing a smile. Michael sat opposite her, in a white shirt and a neatly tied tie, as if this morning was just a regular business meeting. "Thank you for coming," Linda said. "I just want everyone to calm down." I sat down opposite Michael. He looked up, his pale blue eyes expressionless. I realized he was ready for his performance. Linda spoke first. "Emma, I know you're angry, but my son, he's just confused." I looked straight at her, my voice slow and calm in a way I didn't recognize as my own. "For the sake of peace, you allowed your son to forget how to be a person." Robert glanced slightly without speaking. It was just a glance, but I understood. He had known this for a long time, and he chose silence. Linda clasped her hands together. "Don't say that. I only want to keep this family together." I replied softly, "You're only keeping the shell, Mom. The inside has already rotted." No one said anything more. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. I heard the waves crashing offshore, the sound of a bird flapping its wings on the rooftop tiles. Everything felt like it was happening in slow motion, where the sounds were as heavy as the wind before a storm. I turned to Robert. "Do you ever think that when a person repeatedly makes the same mistake, without anyone stopping them, it's no longer a mistake? It's character?" Robert looked up at me, his eyes weary. "I know. But sometimes, the truth needs time for people to be brave enough to speak it. I nodded, my gaze still directed at Linda. I don't blame you for raising him, but I understand. Sometimes, complicity is called two words. Family. Linda's hands trembled, her voice choked. You're hurting me. No, I replied. I'm just saying what you chose not to hear for years. Michael cut in, his voice artificially even and warm. That's enough. Don't turn this into a courtroom. I turned, looked at him, and smiled faintly. You've always been a good performer, Michael. So I'm sure you know. Every stage eventually has to dim the lights. He gave a faint laugh, then turned to his parents. I was wrong. I apologize for upsetting everyone. The statement was perfectly delivered. Right timing, right tone. He apologized in front of his parents, like an adult son confessing a mistake, playing his role perfectly. Linda wiped her tears, grasping his hand. My son, I know you didn't mean it. The pressure just led you astray. He nodded slightly, his eyes lowered. The scene unfolded as perfectly as a familiar family photograph. Tears, forgiveness, and silence. I looked at them, then looked down. His hand reached out to grasp mine, the same way he always did when he wanted to shut down an argument. Cold, firm, and emotionless. He murmured, just loud enough for me to hear, "Give me another chance. For them." I looked at his hand, feeling its weight like iron shackles. Are you apologizing to me, or are you performing for them? Believe whatever you want. Linda intervened, her voice trembling. Emma, forgive him. I promise everything will blow over. I looked up, meeting her gaze. No, Mom. Things don't blow over. They just bury us alive, slower. Robert stirred slightly, then said softly, almost to himself, sometimes silence is the heaviest sin. That sentence made Linda turn, her eyes widening. But Robert just looked down at his teacup, his gaze distant. Michael pulled his hand from mine and stood up. I'll leave first. Perhaps the family needs time. I nodded. You always need time, Michael. The problem is you never use it to change. The door closed behind him. The sound echoed, heavy like a final period. Linda sank back into the chair. I just want peace, Emma. I know, I said softly. But sometimes it is the very desire for peace that causes the kind of wounds that can never be quieted again. I stood up, thanking Robert with a look. He nodded without speaking, but his eyes seemed to say it all. I understand. As I stepped onto the porch, the rain began to fall, in large, heavy drops hitting the tin roof hard. I inhaled deeply. The smell of wet earth filled my lungs. In the distance, the sea was rough. I heard it whistle through the wind's rhythm, like someone calling out my name in vain. I opened my umbrella, then didn't raise it. I let the rain fall, cold and wet, but real. Because at least, it didn't pretend to be love. That morning, the rain fell lightly, enough to blur the window pane and cover everything in a layer of dampness. I sat in the kitchen, a cup of tea in my hand, my eyes fixed on the distant sea. Outside, the waves crashed against the shore steadily, the only honest thing left in this life. Michael walked in. His suit was as immaculate as if there had been no heavy night before. He got his coffee, sat down opposite me, and said nothing. The air between us was like a flat surface of water. It would shatter with just one strong breath. I set my teacup down and said softly, "How about we go to the clinic together?" He looked up. "Which clinic?" "The one you said Lila went to." The silence was short, Then he gave a dry laugh. Are you serious? I'm not joking. He leaned forward, his eyes cold. You told them? He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing like thunder in the small kitchen. I didn't flinch. I just looked at him, my voice so calm it felt alien to myself. Yes, because they are the only ones left who will listen to me. Between us, the teacup tilted and spilled, the liquid splashing out, lightly steaming. A perfect metaphor for what was happening. The pretense of peace finally spilled over, hot, wet, and leaving a scorch mark. He looked at the streak of liquid on the table and ground out, You had no right to do that. No right to speak the truth? No right to slander my sister. I gave a faint smile. If speaking the truth is called slander, then perhaps you are the one who turned the truth into a crime. He was silent, his eyes like two shards of ice. I knew in his mind he was scrambling to maintain order, the order he always worshipped, even when it was burying us alive. What do you gain by doing this? He asked, his voice softening. Freedom. By destroying the family? No, Michael. By stopping the act of living in the perfect play you directed. He stood up, walking toward the window, the gray light illuminating his back. You always overstate everything. You make people suffocate. No, I said. I am just breathing for the first time in years. He turned back, his face slightly contorted from restraint. I apologized. Wasn't that enough? An apology is just the veneer of a man afraid of the light. I spoke slowly, each word slipping past the lingering steam on my lips. He was silent. We stood only a few feet apart, but the distance felt like a lifetime. Outside, the wind slammed against the window pane, each beat harder than the last. I heard the waves pound the cliff face, the sound sharp and dry. Something inside me, like the water outside, was shattering, but this time it wasn't out of fear. Did you think I would stay quiet like before? I asked. I thought you would regret it. I laughed. I regretted it for 10 years, Michael. I think that's enough. He moved closer, his hand twitching as he grabbed the napkin on the table to wipe the spilled tea. I watched the movement, meticulous, cautious, emotionless, and suddenly understood. He wasn't wiping because of the mess. He was wiping because he hated seeing the trace of the truth. What do you want? He asked, his voice weary. I want you to look at what you've done, not for me, but for yourself. To what end? To understand that control is not love. He shook his head and turned away. You don't understand the real world, Emma. People have to compromise. Compromising with what is wrong makes people lose their humanity. It's how you survive. No, I said. That's how you exist. I want to live. He looked at me, his eyes tired and tinged with contempt. You will regret everything you are doing. I stepped closer to him, my voice low. Maybe, but at least this time, I will regret having told the truth. He turned away, opened the door, and said nothing more. The door closed, the wind creeping through the gap, making the candle on the table sway slightly. I looked at the still warm tea stain, the faint smoke rising, slowly dissolving into the air. A white mist covered the glass, reflecting my silhouette, mixed with the gray sky. I touched the spill on the table, the warmth slowly fading. It was the first time I saw that silence also has a shape. It looks like a trail of smoke, dissolving yet leaving a scent. I sat down and closed my eyes. In my head, my own words repeated, clear as a clock's tick. An apology is just the veneer of a man afraid of the light. I didn't know if I was crying or if the rain outside was just falling too close.
I only knew that, in that moment, I stopped being afraid of breaking something, because I understood every shattering is the beginning of the truth.
That night, the house was quiet as the sea before a storm. I sat in front of the computer screen, the blue light reflecting on the walls, cold and dry. The wind blew softly through the slightly open window, rustling the papers beside me. I hadn't intended to search, it was just something in his silence that made me know the story wasn't over. I logged back into the joint accounts, this time, not the savings account, but the bank email. The transaction history folder. A list appeared. Numbers, recipient names, dates. I scrolled down and then stopped. One name repeated continuously, every month. Lila Hale. The amounts varied, but they were all rounded figures, neat enough not to arouse suspicion if someone merely glanced at them. I zoomed in on the statement. The first transfer, support for personal project. The most recent, consultation. But I knew these weren't any projects at all, they were evidence. I sat still, my hand resting on the mouse. The cursor blinked on the screen, as if waiting for me to decide, save it or delete it. The door opened, the sound of keys clinking. He was home. His footsteps were so familiar that I knew the exact time he would pause to take off his shoes, the rustle of his coat, the calculating, tired sigh. I didn't turn around. The screen remained lit. "You're still up?" he asked. "Yes." "It's late." "I know." A moment of silence. I heard him walk behind me, then stop completely. "What are you looking at?" I turned a screen toward him. "You gave all of it to her?" The blue light reflected in his eyes. He didn't seem surprised. He just inhaled very slowly. "It's family business." The answer dropped like an iceberg. No sound, yet so heavy that the air seemed to distort. I stood up. "Family?" "Lila is my sister. And who am I?" He shrugged. "Outsiders wouldn't understand." "Outsider," I repeated, smiling softly. "I've lived in this house for 10 years, and I'm still an outsider." He stepped closer, his gaze flat. "You're being hysterical." "No, I'm just sober." "You don't know what she's been through." "No, but I know what I am going through." I pointed to the screen, where Lila Hale's name appeared repeatedly like an accusation. "Is this what you call family?" He crossed his arms, his voice low. "I was just helping her." "By taking away everything you promised to protect with me?" "I don't want to argue." "Because you have nothing left to defend." He turned away, looking out the window. Outside, the moon was half covered by clouds. The entire room was bathed in a pale blue light that made him look unfamiliar, like a man I had never known. "You can't understand my affection for my sister," I said softly. "It's not your affection for her. It's the validation you need from anyone, as long as they allow you to feel right." He was silent, his shoulders twitching slightly. "Do you know," I continued, "when I opened these files, I wasn't angry. I just felt light. Because I finally saw what you hide beneath your calm exterior. Fear." He spun around. "Fear of what?" "Fear of the light." We looked at each other, the only sounds in the room being the waves and the wind hitting the glass. He stepped closer, saying softly, "You can delete everything, Emma. Pretend nothing happened. We can start over." I asked, "Start over on a foundation of lies?" "No one needs to know." "But I do." He gave a slight, humorless laugh. "You always have to win." "No," I replied. "I just want to be real." A beat of silence. Then he said, his voice so low it was almost a whisper, "You will regret this." I looked straight into his eyes. "Maybe. But at least this time I regret having looked, not having closed my eyes. I clicked to save the files to the hard drive, the dry click echoing. He watched me, his face unchanged. "It's all just a misunderstanding," he said. "Lila needs protection." "And I need respect." "You are destroying your own life." "No, Michael. I am taking it back." He clenched his fist.
What will you do with those files?
"I don't know yet. Maybe send them to Ethan, or let Lila tell him herself." He frowned. "Ethan is not involved." "You're right," I scoffed, "but everyone is accidentally involved when it benefits them." He looked at me, longer than usual, then turned and walked out into the hallway. "I don't want to see you like this." "Then don't look." The bedroom door closed behind him, softly yet definitively. I sat down, taking a deep breath. The sound of the waves outside mingled with the wind through the door crack, cold but real. On the screen, the text, "Files saved successfully," appeared. I gently touched the trackpad, letting the cursor rest on the file name, proof_lila.pdf. I looked at it for a long time, then turned off the screen. My reflection in the dark glass was blurry but clearer than ever. Perhaps the evidence wasn't just in the numbers, but in my untrembling gaze. The woman who had finally stopped believing in beautiful apologies. I sat alone in the living room. Night had draped over the ash-colored walls, leaving only the faint blue light radiating from the small lamp on the corner table. There was no clock ticking, no wind howling, only a silence, so prolonged that I could hear my own heartbeat. On the table, the folder still lay there. The statements, the lines of notes, the undeniable money transfers. I had read them over and over, dozens of times, but each time I looked, my heart felt a little heavier. Michael wasn't home yet. Perhaps he knew I had found everything, or perhaps he no longer cared to know. I picked up the cold teacup, looked at my reflection in the dull water, then set it down. I thought I was family too. The sentence slipped out, soft enough for only me to hear. I turned away and realized tears were not falling. Perhaps, when the pain crosses a certain threshold, the body learns to be silent instead of crying. I stood up and opened the window. The cold wind rushed in, carrying the sound of the waves. Moonlight spilled across the floor, reflecting the scattered pieces of paper like ashes. I whispered, as if talking to myself. When the pain is deep enough, you no longer need proof. I knew it was time to call Ethan, Lila's fiancé. The man I had only met a couple of times, just enough to know he was a decent person, and perhaps the only one who didn't yet know he was being lied to. I opened my phone and found his number in my contacts. When the third ring sounded, his voice came through, low and weary. "Hello?" I hesitated. "It's me, Emma Hale." A pause. "Emma, is everything all right?" I took a deep breath. "I don't know how to start this, but I think you need to hear it." He exhaled softly. "Is this about Lila?" "Yes." "Isn't she there?" "No. And perhaps you don't really know where she is either." On the other end, the sound of the wind came through the phone. I imagined Ethan standing somewhere, perhaps on a porch, beneath the pale light of a street lamp. "She told me," I continued, "that she is pregnant." His voice hitched. "I know. She told me I was the father." I closed my eyes. "Do you believe her?" He laughed softly, a sound as sad as a sigh. "I want to, but she always says what I want to hear." The blue light shone on my hand, making it look pale. I gripped the phone tightly. "Ethan, I need to ask you directly. Do you know she has been receiving money from Michael?" Silence. Long. Yes, he said softly. I found out a few weeks ago. She told me it was payment for a project. There is no project. I heard him sigh, as if a part of him had just collapsed. So it's true. It is, I replied. And I think you should know one more thing. I paused, letting my heart steady. When my voice came out again, it was low but firm. She has never been pregnant. On the other side, silence. Then a laugh burst out, not one of joy, but the kind of laugh from someone who has just seen a truth they were desperately trying to avoid. Of course, he said. God, I should have known. I heard his footsteps, perhaps walking outside. The sound of a door opening, the rush of wind. Thank you, he said quietly. I don't know what you gain by telling me this, but I know it wasn't easy. No, I said. But sometimes, speaking the truth is the only way to breathe. Ethan was silent for a few seconds. Does Michael know? I think by now he knows everything. The problem is, he chooses not to believe it. Out of love or fear? Both. I heard his voice falter. Lila. She always makes people want to save her. True, I said. But when you try to save someone who doesn't want to live genuinely, you only end up sinking with them. We fell silent together. There was something in that quiet that was no longer an empty space, but an acknowledgement. Two strangers standing at opposite ends of the same lie. Ethan spoke last. Thank you, Emma. If you hadn't called, I probably would still believe her. I used to believe him too, I replied. And that is why I understand you. I hung up. The screen went dark, reflecting my face in the blue light. Pale, weary, but no longer trembling. I set the phone down, then gathered the statements, neatly tucking them into an envelope. No more anger, no more regret. Just a need to end a story that had dragged on too long. Outside, the waves still pounded the shore. Rain began to fall, splattering against the window glass. I gently touched the film of condensation, drawing a straight line down, dividing my reflection. One half old, one half new. Beneath the wind and the rain, I heard a small whisper in my head. Some truths don't come from family, but from a stranger. Someone distant enough to dare to speak the real thing. I turned off the light. The blue glow vanished. The room sank into darkness, leaving only the sound of the sea, persistent, honest, like the only credible testimony left. That afternoon the sky was iron gray. The wind from the sea blew in, heavy with the scent of salt and cold. I sat in the living room, listening to the clock tick steadily. Linda had called everyone together. We need to talk as a family, she said on the phone, her voice trembling. I didn't want to go, but I went anyway. Perhaps to witness the very end of the pretense. When I walked in, Robert was sitting in his armchair, his eyes fixed on the floor. Linda stood by the window, twisting a handkerchief tightly in her hands. Michael was in the center of the room, in his white shirt, his tie neatly fastened. And next to him was Ethan, the man I had spoken to the night before. No one smiled. No one greeted me. It was just 4 people. 5 long shadows cast on the wooden floor, like the specters of the same mistake. Ethan was the first to break the silence. He looked directly at Michael, his voice hoarse. Do you believe her? Michael flinched, but didn't look away. I want to. That answer plunged the room into another layer of silence. Linda placed a hand on her chest. Robert sighed softly. I stood beside them, not intervening, just watching the man who had once shared every meal, every sleep with me, now talking about belief as if speaking to a mirror. Ethan gave a faint, humorless laugh. You know, I used to believe Lila just like that. Believed her so much I didn't realize I was being led astray. And then, he paused, his gaze shifting toward me. A stranger had to call me to tell me the truth. Michael clenched his fist, his eyes twitching slightly. She has no reason to lie to you. Ethan replied, no, but you do. The sentence dropped in the middle of the room, sharp and cold as broken glass. Linda stepped forward, her voice trembling. Stop it, both of you. No one needs to make a scene. Ethan turned to her. Did you know? Lila has never been pregnant. I have the medical results here. She recoiled, her face pale. Michael stepped over and snatched the paper from Ethan's hand. What do you want? I want you to look at the truth, Ethan said, his voice low. She lied, and you helped her keep that lie with money, with affection, and with your own blindness. Michael crumpled the paper in his hand. You don't understand anything. I spoke up, my voice soft but clear enough. I used to be like you, and that belief killed me. The room fell quiet. I saw Linda turn to look at me, her eyes wide, as if hearing me speak the truth for the first time. I walked slowly towards Michael. You believed because you were afraid. Afraid to face the fact that the person you love most could betray you. Afraid that if she was wrong, your entire life was wrong too. Michael didn't speak, just stood still, his jaw tight. Robert placed his hand on the armrest of his chair, speaking slowly. Some mistakes begin with good intentions, but if we keep excusing them, they become sins. Linda murmured, Robert. He looked at her, his gaze stern but not angry. We let our son grow up with the illusion that love means hiding the truth. Now he has learned that very well. Michael sat down, resting his head on his hand. The only sound in the room was the wind whistling through the door crack. I stood there, looking at the man who had once made me believe that silence was love, now silent because he had no words left to justify himself. Ethan spoke, hoarse yet calm. Do you know what I lost? Trust. But now I see, losing trust is easier than losing myself. I nodded slightly, then said, believing in love is not wrong. The mistake is keeping it for someone who isn't worthy. No one said anything more. Linda wept. Robert looked out the window where the gray sky was heavy with rain. Michael bowed his head, his hand still clenching the crumpled paper. I turned away, walking towards the door. Each step on the wooden floor was strangely audible. When I reached the doorknob, I paused for a moment, turning back to look at them. 4 people, each trapped in a different form of blind love. I said softly, no one is born to be a bad person. It's just that some choose comfort over the truth. Outside, the rain began to fall, thick and steady. I opened the door, and the cold wind rushed in, blowing out the candle on the table. The light flickered out, leaving only the scent of burnt wax lingering in the air. I stepped onto the porch, taking a deep breath. The smell of salt filled my lungs, sharp and heavy, but real. Behind me, Linda's voice rang out, small and trembling. Emma. I didn't turn back. Where are you going? To find something that no longer needs anyone's belief. I walked down the steps, letting the rain soak my hair, my clothes. Each drop hitting my skin was chillingly cold, but I didn't feel pain. Because for the first time, I felt the only things that were real in that house, the wind, the rain, and freedom. The air in the house was thick. The rain had just stopped, and a pale light shone through the window, spreading across the long wooden table, where everything was about to end. The family sat around the table. Linda sat on the right, hands clasped, her eyelids drooping with worry. Robert was silent at the head of the table, his posture straight, like a man awaiting judgment. Michael was opposite him, his face expressionless, save for the crease between his brows. And Lila, in a pale dress, her hair slightly messy,
her eyes moist as if she had just been reminded to cry. I sat facing them, my hand resting on my phone. Everyone looked at each other, but no one knew how to begin. Robert cleared his throat. We are here because we want clarity. No one is being forced, but everyone needs to be truthful. His voice was calm, but in his eyes, I clearly saw exhaustion. The weariness of a man who had witnessed too many lies to still believe in reconciliation. I opened my phone, swiping to the prepared file. The blue light from the screen shone on my hand, cold and trembling. Before I speak, I want everyone to hear this. No one responded, only the distant sound of the waves. I pressed play. Michael's voice came from the phone speaker, low and familiar. Just accept it. I'll transfer it regularly every month. No one needs to know. Then Lila's voice, soft and pleading. I'm afraid they'll find out. I'll handle it. You just need to listen to me. The room suddenly felt cold. Linda turned to Michael, her eyes wide. Michael, you knew? He still sat there, back straight, his gaze directed at no one. Don't look at me like that, Mom. Her voice choked. You actually did that. He closed his eyes, then said softly, as if only to release the pressure in his chest. I was only helping my sister. The sound dropped onto the wooden table, shattering like the last raindrop hitting the ground. Lila turned, tears falling genuinely this time. Don't say anything more.
Let me explain. Michael looked at her, his eyes a mix of anger and protectiveness. Don't cry. They won't understand. I looked at them, two people standing together, no longer hiding. All layers of the play were torn. No one understands? I said, my voice low. Or is it because you two are afraid, so you just pretend to sacrifice for each other? Leela choked. You don't know anything, I know enough, I interrupted. I have the statements, the recording, and your brother's silence. Linda buried her face in her hands, breathing heavily. Oh God, is this true? Robert spoke, his voice deep but steady. It is true, Linda, and we have nothing left to excuse it. Leela burst into tears, the crying no longer beautiful. I didn't want this, I just needed someone there. You had someone, I said. Your brother, and our money. Michael stood up abruptly. That's enough, Emma. I looked at him. No, Michael, not yet. I pointed to the phone. That's your voice. No one forced you to say it, you chose to. He took a sharp breath, stepped behind his chair, leaning his hands on the backrest. The cold light shone on his face, half light, half shadow. I only wanted to keep things quiet. Do you feel quiet now? I asked. Look around. This is the price of peace. No one said anything more. Linda silently wept. Robert looked at his son, his eyes aching with sadness. And Leela, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders shaking, her sobs mixing with the sound of the wind creeping through the door crack. I rose from my chair, looking at all four of them. You said help, but you never asked if anyone needed your help. You only helped to feel right, to feel stronger, kinder. But truly, you were only covering up your own cowardice. Michael looked up, his eyes weary. What do you want me to say now? I don't need you to say anything. I just need you to be silent, but truly silent. Not the kind of silence to hide, but the silence to understand. Robert placed his hand on the table and nodded slightly. She's right, Michael. Linda turned to her husband, tears streaming down her cheeks. Robert. He continued slowly. I once thought peace was love, but it turns out
Peace is sometimes how people avoid the truth. Lila looked up, mascara smudged around her eyes. I was wrong. But you, she turned to Michael, you were wrong too. Michael looked at her for a long time, then dropped his hands from the chair and sat down. I know. The phrase was short, but for the first time, it sounded real. I turned off the phone. The screen went dark. No more voices, no more sounds. Only heavy breathing and the silent light on the wooden table. No one moved. The room felt frozen for a few minutes. Then Robert said softly, almost a whisper, perhaps, sometimes people have to let everything fall apart to see who truly remains. I nodded, replying softly, exactly, because only in the wreckage can we see our foundation. I picked up the teacup in front of me, the water cold with no steam. I swirled it gently, looking at the color of the liquid, clear but cloudy at the bottom. Just like family affection.
The rain had stopped. The air inside the house was heavy like wet thread, the damp smell of wood and old tea mingling. The living room remained exactly as it was, chairs slightly askew, stray light from the window illuminating faces no one wanted to look at. Michael sat at the end of the table, his hands clasped. Linda hadn't stopped crying, and Robert stood quietly by the porch, looking out at the sea. Ethan was silent, his eyes fixed on the floor. Lila bowed her head, her hands tightly clutching the hem of her dress, her shoulders shaking. I stood, my hand lightly touching the edge of the table. You said you were helping your sister, I said slowly. But truthfully. Michael looked up, his gaze tired and cold. No, you were helping your own selfish ego. Robert's voice resonated from behind me, deep and steady. He walked into the center of the room, the morning light shining on his stern face. No one has the right to do what is wrong and call it love, Michael. Michael did not respond. He just looked down at the teacup in front of him. I saw his hand tremble slightly, then the cup slipped and shattered on the table. The water spilled slowly, spreading out, dripping down the wooden edge, falling onto the floor. A small sound that echoed far, like the final punctuation mark. No one rushed to pick it up. No one spoke. Linda made to bend down, but Robert placed a hand on her shoulder. Don't, he said softly. The truth doesn't need anyone to speak it. It breaks out on its own. That sentence hung in the air, touching everyone. The crowded room suddenly felt vast, not because there was more space, but because everyone was retreating deep into their own solitude. Ethan pushed his chair back and stood up. I think I should leave. No one asked him to stay. He turned to me, nodding slightly, his eyes sad but clear. Thank you for speaking up, he said quietly. Sometimes the truth doesn't save anyone, but at least it frees the one who still knows how to breathe. I gave a slight nod. Take care, Ethan. He turned, opened the door and walked out. Light flooded in, overwhelming the stale air of the house. The door closed, surprisingly soft. Inside, Lila broke down, sobbing. It wasn't the kind of prepared tears anymore, but a sound erupted from deep in her throat, heavy, genuine, and late. I'm sorry, she said, her voice catching. I didn't think things would go this far. Linda pulled her chair closer, trying to hug her, but Robert gently stopped her. Let her bear it herself, Linda. Sometimes love needs distance. Lila looked around, her eyes tear-streaked, like a lost child searching for someone familiar. Michael. He didn't look at her, just sat still, his hands clasped, his eyes empty. She choked out, speaking through sobs. I just wanted someone to see me. I just wanted to be believed. Michael looked up, his lips trembling, his voice catching as if he were hearing himself for the first time. I only wanted that too. Linda wept openly. Robert shook his head and turned away. I looked at the two siblings sitting opposite each other. like two shattered mirror fragments reflecting only emptiness. No more waves, no more rain, only a small sound. Water from the broken teacup still dripping onto the floor, steady and persistent, like the final breath of something once called family. I walked around the table, taking a napkin to wipe the spill, my movement slow. The tea stained the white cloth brown, a small mark but indelible. I placed a shard of the broken cup on the table. The porcelain reflected the dim light, beautiful in the way things are when their usefulness has ended. "What will you tell your mother?" I asked softly. Michael didn't reply. "Silence again?" I continued. "Do you think silence will make everything disappear?" He looked at me, his eyes red. "What do you want me to do? Grovel? Cry?" "No, just look at what you've done." He laughed dryly.
Look for what?
"To know that people can love each other, yet still hurt each other beyond return." He leaned back in his chair, his head tilted up, looking at the ceiling. "I'm tired." "I know." "You won," I said softly. This wasn't a competition. Outside, the sun began to break through the clouds, filtering through the door crack. The light hit the broken piece of the teacup, casting a thin, trembling beam of light on the wall. Robert looked at that light and said, his voice weary but gentle, "No one wins, no one loses. There are only people who have to live on after everything falls apart." I turned to look at him. His eyes were sad but serene. Perhaps he had understood. Sometimes the only right silence is when there is nothing left to save. Linda approached, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Will you be all right?" I nodded gently. "I think so." I left the table, walking toward the door. The wind from the sea rushed in, carrying the heavy scent of salt, but more welcome than ever. Behind me, I heard Lila's soft sob, Michael dragging his chair, and then everything faded into silence. Before stepping out, I turned back to look at the room one last time. Light fell onto the tea stain on the table, half dry, half still spreading. The void after the storm is not peace. It is merely the quiet before one learns how to live again with what remains. I whispered, just loud enough for myself. Silence is not forgiveness. It is just a way not to drown in the noise. Then I walked outside. The wind blew fiercely, whipping my coat open, carrying the salty sea air to my lips. Cold, but real.
The morning after the rain, the sky opened up to a dull white. The surface of the sea was flat as glass, only a few birds circling, leaving blurred shadows on the water. The house was silent, too silent. The kind of silence that only follows when all words have been completely spent. I walked down to the kitchen, light streaming through the window frame, shining on the countertop where the tea stain from yesterday still faintly remained. The broken shard of the cup had been cleared by Linda, but the watermark was still there, soaked deep into the wood, the trace of what cannot be undone. Michael sat at the dining table, an untouched cup of coffee in front of him. The morning light highlighted his cheekbones, emphasizing the lines of weariness. We sat opposite each other, neither of us speaking. I looked at him for a long time, then asked, my voice level, "What will you say?" He looked up, his eyes shadowed. "I don't know if there's anything left to say." "Then say what you think." "What I think doesn't matter anymore." I tilted my head. "Say it. We've come this far. At least let's end it with the truth." He sighed, rubbing his forehead. "I just wanted stability." I looked down at the table and smiled softly. Stability. From beginning to end, that was still his only keyword. The reason for silence, for hiding, for betrayal, and now, for leaving. I spoke slowly but without trembling. "Then keep it. I choose freedom." I removed my ring and placed it on the table. The metallic sound was distinct, echoing through the room, small, but sharp enough to cut through the thick air. Michael looked at the ring, the light reflecting in his eyes like a dying candle. He didn't touch it, just sat there, his hands clasped, trembling slightly. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said softly. "I know, but you did, simply because you were afraid to face yourself." He bowed his head, silent. I saw clearly. His silence now was no longer a shield, but a void, so empty that the wind could pass right through it. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the pale silver light covered the sea, small waves rippling like a new breath. "Do you remember when we moved here?" I asked, my eyes still fixed outside. "You said the sea would make everything easier to breathe." "And it did," he said. "No, it just helped me realize how long I had been holding my breath." He stood up, walking closer. "Emma, don't do this. We can't do anything," I interrupted. "Do you call living like two shadows in the same house a marriage?" He was silent, his shoulders slumped. "I know I was wrong." "No," I replied. "You just know you got caught." A draft rushed through, making the door rattle gently. The light shone directly on the wedding ring on the table, the metal glinting, bright but cold. I turned back to look at him, my eyes no longer angry, only weary. "You always wanted stability. But stability isn't peace. It's just fear wrapped in silk." He nodded slightly, offering no resistance. I continued. "You might miss me, but not out of love. But because I was the place where you hid the best part of yourself." He turned away, his gaze empty. "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet, but I know that wherever there is light, I will be able to breathe." I picked up my coat and walked towards the door. He still stood there, in the middle of the white room, like a man who had just lost the map of his own life. Before stepping out, I said softly, "We both lost what we loved, but I found myself again." The door closed softly. Outside, the wind was stronger, whipping my hair. I walked down the steps, the ground still wet, the scent of sea salt rising intensely. Far away, the slope leading to the highway was faintly illuminated by the early sun, the only road connecting this house to the rest of my life. I didn't look back. Every step on the gravel sounded like a breath. When I reached the gate, I stopped, taking a deep breath, feeling my lungs fill with salty, bright air. Behind me, the house still stood, small against the gray sky. Ahead, the road was long, silent, but open. For the first time, I wasn't afraid of the void, because in that emptiness, I could hear my own voice. That morning, the wind was dry and gentle. I folded the last shirt, placed it in the suitcase, and closed the lid. Inside the house, everything was silent. So quiet, I could hear the waves crashing somewhere behind the walls. I packed up and left the house. This house was once the place where I learned silence, and now it was the place where I learned how to leave. Every room had its own scent. The kitchen was tinged with the bitterness of old tea. The living room faintly smelled of old wood. And the bedroom, the scent of years that could never be retrieved. I stood in the doorway, holding the bunch of keys. The metal surface was cold and heavy, sharply imprinted in my palm like a physical memory. From the staircase, Linda walked down. The light slanted through the curtain, falling on her face, pale, aged after just one night. She stopped at the bottom step, looking at me, as if she wanted to say something. I waited. But she tried to speak, then fell silent. Her eyes held 1,000 unspoken words: regret, sorrow, and a touch of shame. I understood. Not everyone has the courage to apologize. I pulled my suitcase toward the door. She spoke softly, her voice trembling. "Will you be all right?" I stopped, turning back. She stood there, small in the doorway, her hands tightly clasped. I spoke, light as the wind. "If no one teaches me to endure, I will." She didn't answer, she only nodded, then turned away. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. The cold light shone directly on my face. The wind from the sea blew up, salty and dry. Behind me, the door closed, neither loud nor soft, just enough to know that something had just ended. The small road leading away from the houses curved along the sandy slope. I walked to the bus station, where the smell of coffee and salt mingled. An old white-painted bus was waiting, its wheels dusty, the door half open. The driver, about 50, smiled lightly. "Where are you headed, ma'am?" "Somewhere with books and quiet," I said. He nodded. "Then there are a few places better than the sea." I took the second seat, by the window. As the bus began to move, I looked through the glass. The house receded, growing smaller, then disappearing behind the sand dunes. I didn't cry, perhaps because I had nothing left to lose. The new town was small and peaceful. A row of low wooden houses ran along the main street, flanked by a flower shop, a bakery, and an old bookstore with a faded sign. I stopped in front of the glass door. Inside, the shelves were cluttered with books, a warm yellow light cast by a low-hanging round lamp. A man was wiping the counter, his hair salt and pepper, his demeanor calm. When I pushed the door open, a small bell chimed, clear, crisp, like the start of something new. He looked up and smiled. "Hello, first time seeing you here." I nodded. "I just moved here." "What genre do you like?" "I don't know. Maybe books about people surviving silence." He gave a soft chuckle, not asking anything further. "I think you'll like the back corner by the window. That place has a lot of old books, and a lot of people who found themselves again there." I followed his direction, walking to the back of the store. The window was slightly ajar, the wind blowing through, carrying the scent of paper, dust, and a faint whiff of coffee from the cafe next door. I sat down on the wooden chair, my hand gently touching the spine of a book, one after another. A small notebook fell out. The first page read, "To whoever finds this, may you learn to breathe again." I smiled softly. As evening fell, the light in the store changed to a honey color. The owner, Daniel, I learned his name later, brought over a cup of tea. "We don't have a menu here," he said. "I only make one kind." I took it. The tea smelled light, unlike any I had tasted before. "What flavor is this?" I asked. "Earl Grey with a touch of lavender," he replied. "People say it helps them sleep well, but I think it just helps people remember they are alive." I took a sip. The warmth spread through me. Neither strong nor weak, just enough to recognize a genuine sensation on my tongue. I looked out the window. The sky was turning purple. Across the street, the bakery sign had just lit up, small bright squares reflecting on the glass. Daniel asked, "Do you read often?" "I used to. Then I stopped. Now I'm learning again." "Me too." He smiled gently. "People often read to forget, but some people read to remember what they've been through." I didn't reply. I just set the teacup down, listening to the gentle clink on the wooden table. Outside, a gust of wind swept past. The door trembled slightly and the bell chimed again. A thin, clear, yet profound sound. I looked around the bookstore where the golden light covered the old wooden shelves. Dust settled thinly like mist. There was no arguing, no apologies, only the warm steam of tea and the smell of old paper. For the first time in years, I felt my heart was no longer constricted. Before I left the store, Daniel said, "You can come back any time. Here no one asks about anyone's past." I smiled. "Then maybe I'll stay longer than just a cup of tea." When I stepped outside, it was fully dark. I pulled up my collar, walking through the quiet street. Behind me, the light from the bookstore still shone, soft and persistent, like a small beacon for those who had lost their way. I stopped,
looking over my shoulder one last time. The glass door reflected my image in the light, blurry but real. I thought, perhaps this is the first time in my life I don't need anyone to teach me how to endure. A cool autumn morning. The wind was gentle, the sunlight thin as a breath. I sat in the car, looking through the misted windshield, seeing my reflection. A strangely serene face, as if all the storms had passed and were now just a faint layer of dust clinging to time. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, and closed the car door. The sound echoed in the stillness like a neat period after a long chapter. Ahead was the small bookstore, its sign faded by the sun, the wooden door slightly ajar. From inside, warm yellow light spilled out, the scent of tea mingling with old paper. I heard myself whisper, like a note for myself. No one leaves when they still want to stay. I left because I needed to breathe. It wasn't a powerful statement, just the truth, simple, needing no proof. I stepped inside, the bell on the door chiming softly, clear and brief. Daniel was stacking books near the counter. He looked up, offering a small smile, just enough to make someone feel at ease. "Good morning," he said. I nodded, removing my scarf. "It's colder than yesterday." "Yes, cold but beautiful." He poured boiling water into a teapot. Steam rose. "Do you prefer your tea bitter or sweet?" I thought for a moment. A little bitter, to remember I can still feel. He smiled. "Me too." I sat down at the small table by the window, the spot I had been sitting in since my first day here. From that corner I could see the whole street, the yellow-leaved trees, the flower shop across the road, and the unhurried passers-by. Life here felt like music without a climax, but engaging enough to make one stay. Daniel brought the tea, a simple white porcelain cup. The aroma of Earl Grey mixed with lavender filled the space. He sat down in the opposite chair, saying nothing. Between us was a faint mist of steam, like a thin layer of fog, maintaining just enough distance. I said, "Do you ever think that the people who walk into your life all come to teach you something?" He looked at me and nodded gently. "And when they leave, the lesson is complete." I laughed, softly as a breath. I used to think loss was punishment. Now I see it's just the process of clearing space for something else to come. "What is that something else?" he asked. "Freedom. Not freedom from someone else, but from my former self." He was silent, just spinning the teacup in his hand, the light shining through the porcelain, casting a small circle of light on the wooden table. "Sounds like an unsent letter." "Maybe," I said. "But perhaps the recipient is the past." Last night I actually sat and wrote. A letter, not to be sent, just to be read once and folded away. I began with the sentence, "To you, who once believed that stability was happiness." I told her that there was nothing wrong with loving someone too much, only wrong with forgetting that love cannot replace oneself. I told her about the mornings when the scent of tea masked the smell of sadness, the silent dinners she still called peace. I told her about the moment she realized that some people say "I love you," but mean "don't change." At the end of the letter I wrote, "If there is one thing I want you to keep, it is this, that you are not damaged, nor are you weak. You merely lived wholeheartedly, and now you are learning how to live for yourself." Then I folded the letter, placed it inside the old notebook, between pages 47 and 48. Not sealed, not sent. Daniel asked, "What did you write this morning?" I wrote a letter to the person I used to be. "And did she reply?" "No, but I feel lighter." He nodded, his eyes warm. "In fact, sometimes a reply isn't necessary. You just need someone to listen. I looked out the window where the early morning sun was fading. On the shelves, books were stacked, some with worn spines, some brand new like life. Chapters already read.
And chapters yet to be opened, I said, half to him, half to myself. I used to fear silence, but now I see it is the most honest breath. He smiled softly. That's when people stop needing to explain themselves. A moment later, I opened my bag and took out a small postcard. The image was of the sea, where I used to live, where I left. I wrote a few short lines without a signature. If you're still there, I hope the tea is still warm. Then I placed it on the counter, under an old novel titled Homeward. No one needed to know who would read it. Maybe someone by chance, or maybe the wind. At noon, the shop was empty. Daniel went upstairs to get inventory. I stayed, reading a few pages of a book. The tea scent gradually faded, the light outside slanted, casting long golden streaks on the bookshelves. I closed my eyes, clearly hearing the clock's tick, steady, unhurried. No memories rushed back. No old images remained. Only a strange feeling. I was exactly where I needed to be. Perhaps every true departure is a form of returning, except it's a return to the person we once lost. I opened my eyes, lightly inhaling the tea scent, and smiled. Outside, the sun fell on the street, slow and gentle. Inside, I heard my own voice, clear and peaceful, as a drop of water falling into a porcelain cup. Light, but real. Early morning. The air carried the scent of cinnamon and baked butter from the bakery across the street. Outside the window, yellow leaves scattered over the dewy sidewalk. Thanksgiving arrived subtly, without fireworks, without fanfare. Just a quiet peace seeping into every corner, enough to remind one that time was still moving. I opened the bookstore door, not turning on the lights right away. Natural light poured in through the glass pane, illuminating the wooden shelves, thin layers of dust floating like bright threads. Daniel was rearranging a table in the corner, on which sat a new teapot, pale blue-green, unlike the old one at my former house, lighter, rounder, and without any cracks. He looked up, his smile gentle. "Tea or coffee this morning?" "Up to you," I said, setting down my bag, "as long as it's real." He chuckled, pouring hot water, steam rising. "The real taste can sometimes be hard to swallow." "But at least it's not a lie," I replied, smiling softly. That sentence seemed to brighten the room a little more. Outside, a few regulars stopped by to buy books for the long holiday. An older woman asked for an old cookbook. A boy chose a story about the stars. As for me, I sat behind the counter, listening to the chime of the doorbell ring steadily every time someone walked in. A small sound, warm like the breath of a home. When the customers thinned out, Daniel brought out 2 cups of tea. The aroma was light, clear, no longer the strong scent of Earl Grey. "What kind of tea is this?" I asked. "Ginger honey," he said. "It's good for the heart." I laughed. "You sound like a doctor." "No," he replied. "I just used to have a weak heart." We sat quietly for a while, listening to the wind outside. In the stillness, the light slanted onto the table, where the new teapot still gave off steam. I said softly, "I used to think pouring tea for someone else was a way of loving." Daniel was silent, just looking at me. "I wasn't wrong," I continued.
"I just forgot to learn how to pour a pot of tea for myself." He nodded, as if he understood perfectly. People often give away what they don't know how to keep. I took a sip of tea. The warmth of the ginger spread down my throat, a slight burn, then dissolved. I looked outside. The sky had cleared, the sun shining on the glass, reflecting onto the teapot, creating a thin streak of light. The light shining on the new teapot like a signal of peace. At noon, Daniel hung a small sign on the door, "Closed for Thanksgiving." The shop was quiet. He cleared the table, placing a slice of pumpkin pie between the two teacups. "No big feast here," he said. "Just pie, tea, and a long list of things to be thankful for." I looked at him and smiled. "Do you ever write yours down?" "I do, but I never read it back." "Why?" "Because I think gratitude doesn't need to be reminded. It just needs to be remembered." I took a spoon and cut a small piece of pie. The cinnamon, ginger, and butter melted on my tongue. "It's delicious," he said, "as long as it's real." The sentence repeated itself like a closed loop. I smiled, this time more gently. In the afternoon, the late sun slid across the buildings opposite, the light staining the street, reflecting through the window into the shop. A soft, warm light, just like my heart now felt. I opened my notebook and wrote a few short lines. "Today I don't need anyone's forgiveness, nor do I need anyone to remember me. I only want to thank the things that hurt me, because thanks to them, I know what true peace is." I stopped writing, looking over at the table. Daniel was reading, the light shining on his hair, creating a pale halo. I asked, "Do you think people change?" He closed the book and replied, "Not entirely. They just return closer to the nature they once were." "Like this teapot?" "Yes. Old or new, it's just a way to hold warmth. The important thing is who is pouring." I smiled, my finger touching the handle of the pot. Hot, but comfortable. When the sun set, I went to the door, looking out at the street. The first streetlights came on, casting light onto the wet sidewalk. Footsteps, laughter, the smell of baked goods, all merged into a small symphony of the holiday season. I stood there for a long time, feeling as if I had just stepped out of a long dream and could finally breathe genuinely. Inside, Daniel was cleaning up, the clinking of cups sounding like the steady rhythm of time. I thought of my parents, of the old house, of the words left unsaid. But that nostalgia no longer pulled me down. It only remained still, like a light in the night, present, but not demanding. Before closing the door, I poured myself another cup of tea, sitting by the window. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season were falling sparsely. I whispered softly, just for myself. There is no greater gift than the fact that we can still be thankful. Then I lifted the cup, inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth spread through my fingertips. For the first time in years, tea was no longer a symbol of waiting. It was just tea, bitter, sweet, real. And I was just me, peaceful enough to pour for myself. 3 years later, the early winter wind carried the scent of pumpkin pie and baked cinnamon. The late afternoon sun slanted through the kitchen window, falling onto the long wooden table. I set the Thanksgiving table meticulously, like an old habit. A white tablecloth, a vase of dried flowers, 2 plates, a glass of orange juice for the little one, a cup of tea for me. The new house was small with only 2 rooms. The window opened onto the back garden, where the afternoon sun cast a golden hue on the grass. Every time I looked out, I felt lucky that everything was now just enough. Not too much to lose, not too little to lack. Clara was cutting the pie in the kitchen. She laughed, stirring her spoon in the glass, her voice clear and bright. "Mom, the pie smells so good." I replied, "Because you're smiling." Clara looked up, her blonde hair falling over her face, the light outlining her features. I thought, perhaps everything truly has passed. I carried the tray of pie out to the porch. It was cold, but the remaining sunlight was gentle. Far away, children were throwing dry leaves on the street, their laughter echoing like an old season's melody. Clara ran around the garden, her dress catching the wind. I was about to call her in when I heard a car stop at the gate. The sound of the car door closing was slow and deliberate. I turned. Michael appeared. He stood there, his hands in his coat pockets, his hair more salt and pepper, his posture still straight, but his eyes were different. No longer the gaze that wanted to control the world, only a touch of quietness. I wasn't surprised. Perhaps deep down I always knew this day would come. He walked slowly closer, stopping at the porch steps. His voice was low and soft. "Are you well?" I nodded. "I am." Just that. Clara ran up, hiding behind me, her eyes curious as she looked at the stranger. He bent down, smiling. "Is that your daughter?" I nodded, my hand resting on her shoulder. "She's beautiful." "Thank you," I said. "Her name is Clara. It means light." He was silent for a moment, then spoke slowly, his voice sliding through a layer of memory. "I used to think we would have a daughter with that name." "I know." The silence between us was no longer heavy. It was like the space after a storm has passed, cold but clear. He looked around the small garden, the yellow sunlight reflecting off the wooden fence. "You really did well." "I just lived," I replied. "I didn't need to be better than anyone." He smiled faintly, but his eyes held a silent sorrow. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted to see that you were all right." "You are seeing it." The wind blew, dry leaves swirling around our feet. Clara ran further away, her laughter crisp. Then she picked up a leaf, holding it up. "Mom, it looks like a heart." I smiled. "Keep it, sweetie." Michael watched her, his eyes glistening. "Do you plan to tell her about me?" I turned back, the slanted light covering half his face. "She doesn't need to know who you are." He nodded slightly, his lips moving but saying nothing more. Perhaps he understood. Sometimes love isn't about being remembered, but about being left in peace. We stood quietly, only hearing the sound of the leaves. Inside the house, the clock chimed 4, a small, steady sound, like the heartbeat of the new home. He said, "I still have the old blue teapot." It was cracked. I glued it back together. It's not beautiful, but it still works. I looked at him, smiling softly. We've all had to glue back things that weren't whole anymore. "Yes," he sighed. "It's just that some choose to hold on, and some choose to let go." The sunlight was fading. I picked up the new teapot. The late light covered it, and the soft steam rose, curling around my hand. "Would you like some tea?" I asked. "No," he replied, taking a step back. "I just want you to know that I still remember the taste of the old morning tea." "But the flavor has changed now," I said. "It's neither bitter nor sweet. Just real enough." He looked at me for another second, then nodded. "That's the taste I could never have." I didn't reply. I just set the pot down, taking my daughter's hand. Clara looked up, her smile crystal clear. "Come on, sweetie. It's getting cold now." I turned away, holding her hand. The light of the late afternoon enveloped us. The wind swept through my hair, the scent of tea still faintly lingering on my hand. Behind me, I heard Michael's footsteps slow, then stop. The sound of the car door opening, then closing. The engine starting, fading away, dissolving into the sounds of dusk. I stood on the porch, watching the little girl chase a flying leaf, her white dress catching the wind. A strange peace spread through me, neither joy nor pain. Just the quietness of someone who has weathered the storm without needing to tell the tale. Clara ran to me, holding up the leaf. "Mom, I caught it!" I stroked her hair and smiled. "That's wonderful." We sat down on the steps, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. On the table, the teapot still held faint steam, the light reflecting on the water's surface, shimmering like a small reminder. Peace doesn't come from who stays, but from realizing we no longer need to hold on to anyone to feel whole. I whispered softly, like a message sent on the wind. Sometimes peace begins when we stop trying to please others. The tea steam dissolved into the air. Clara leaned her head against my shoulder, her small hands holding mine. The weather was turning cold, but my heart was no longer afraid. Because finally, peace wasn't found in the place I once belonged, but in the person I had become.
If you've listened this far, thank you. This story is not about a marriage that broke, but about the way a woman learned how to drink her own cup of tea without needing anyone to pour it, without needing anyone's permission. True peace, in fact, does not follow an apology. It arrives when we stop trying to please people who will never be satisfied. And when Emma held her daughter's hand and walked away into the sunset, that was not just an ending. It was the beginning of an honest life, small yet real. If you've ever had to leave a place just to breathe, if you've ever chosen silence just to find quiet, or if you've ever learned to love yourself again after a profound loss, then this story is for you. I want to know, which part of this story resonated with you the most? Please leave a comment below. Sometimes just one shared sentence can reach someone else who desperately needs to hear it. And if you want to continue this journey with stories about women, family, and the path to finding ourselves again, please subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell so that when a new story is told, you'll be the first to hear it. Because who knows, the next story might be yours.